Greetings and welcome everybody to this, the grand launch of the 15th edition of IDEAZ Journal. And this is a special Rastafari anthology named A 2020 Vision Perspective on the Rastafari Movement. And I am one of the co-editors. My name is Dr. Michael Barnett. I am based at the UWI Mona campus, that's University of the West Indies, the Jamaica campus, in the Department of Sociology, Psychology, and Social Work. And it gives me great joy to bring you greetings on this occasion of the launch. And soon you'll get to meet the co-editors on the journal alongside myself, and that is Dr. Julia Bonacci and Dr. Erin McLeod. So you'll get to meet them a bit later on in this book launch. But very excited to introduce this particular edition because it gives a snapshot of the Rastafari movement at this time. In 2020 was when a lot of the final finishing touches were put on these various Rastafari articles, which have been contributed by several Rastafari studies scholars. Joshua, if you could just do a share the front cover of the slide for the publication. Thank you. There we go. So this is the cover of the publication, and essentially you see the full title is A 2020 Vision Perspective on the Rastafari Movement, Revisiting the Field and Taking Steps Forward. Okay, and myself, Michael Barnett, I'm a co-editor, Julia Bonacci and Erin McLeod, as I said. So briefly, we have, I want to tell you that this event is not only being brought to you by the Department of Sociology, Psychology and Social Work, but also by the Faculty of Social Sciences at 60 Celebration Committee, because as it goes, the Faculty of Social Sciences, of which the department I am in is a part, is celebrating 60 years of the existence of the faculty. So it's very appropriate that we consider this at this time. And I want Dr. Lisa Vassiani, who is one of the key movers and shakers of the Faculty of Social Sciences at 60 Celebration Committee, to say a few words. She is, in actual fact, not only esteemed member of the Department of Government here in the Faculty of Social Sciences, but she is also Associate Dean of Partnerships and Resource Mobilization. So she's one of our Associate Deans at the Faculty of Social Sciences, and she's a lecturer in international relations. That's her specialization. So I want us to hear a few words of greetings from Dr. Lisa Vassiani. So if we could hear from you, Lisa.
Okay. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Dr. Barnett. Good afternoon, everyone. It has certainly been a good year despite the pandemic we are in, and a year of reflection and celebration for the Faculty of Social Sciences as we commemorate our 60th anniversary. It is my pleasure to be here with you at the launch of the 15th volume of the IDEAZ Journal, a 2020 vision perspective on the Rastafari movement, revisiting the field and taking steps forward. I congratulate the co-editors, Dr. Barnett, Dr. Bonacci, Dr. McLeod, and all the contributors to this journal. We celebrate this journal that emerged from the Faculty of Social Sciences, from Professor Ian Boxill, former head of the Department of Sociology, Psychology, Social Work, and former Dean of the Faculty of Social Sciences. Professor Boxill founded this journal in 2001. So imagine that's already 20 years ago, with the goal of putting forward new and provocative ideas. I promised Michael I would speak for about 30 seconds, but as I looked through the contents of the journal, I reflected on the first 14 or so years of my life growing up in Coral Gardens, Rose Hall, St. James, being totally oblivious to the massacre, the 1960 Coral Gardens massacre, being totally oblivious to that, of going to schools where that part of our history was entirely missed, where children of Rastafari families or Rastafari children were only allowed to attend at least two of the schools I went to in the 1980s, and where Black hairstyles were either not allowed or not encouraged. So for me, this journal, and in particular, this volume of the journal that contemplates Rastafari women's studies, the communes, charismatic leadership, Bob Marley, Black racial identity, repatriation, liberty and law, and citizenship. This journal is actually quite important and is pushing new frontiers, which was the original idea of our founder, Professor Hill. So congratulations on the launch of Volume 15, and thank you, Dr. Barnett and team, for including this important launch under the auspices of the Faculty of Social Sciences 60th anniversary. Welcome, everyone. Back to you, Michael.
Okay, thank you, Lisa. And now gives me great pleasure. I'm hoping that we can get to introduce Professor Boxill. I like to say, well, there's so much to say about Professor Boxill. And I should also let you know that Professor Boxill is the founder, as you heard Lisa just mention, of this journal, IDEAZ. It was his idea, pun intended. The IDEAZ journal was his idea, and he founded it in 2001. And Professor Ian Boxill is presently the director of the UWI Community Film Project and the deputy principal of the University of the West Indies, Mona, Jamaica. He was the former dean of the Faculty of Social Sciences, very important, as well as the former head of my department that I'm presently in, the Department of Sociology, Psychology, and Social Work. He also held the Grace Kennedy S. Carlton Alexander Chair in Management Studies for 8 years. He has authored and edited 8 books. He has over 60 academic articles and has taught at universities in New Zealand, Mexico, and the USA, and intermittently at St. Augustine and Cavell campuses of the University of the West Indies. He has consulted with and worked for organizations such as the Caribbean Examinations Council, that's the CXC, the Department for International Development, Worldwide Fund for Nature, UNESCO, the World Bank, the Caribbean Tourism Organization, among so many others. And as I said, not only did he found and edit the IDEAZ Journal in 2001, but also, interestingly enough, he founded and edits the Carib Explorer magazine, which is a science magazine, which is to show you how multidextrous he is. He has also served as the associate editor for the Social Sciences and Humanities Journal, known as Revisitar Mexicana del Caribe. So without further ado, let us welcome Professor Ian Boxill to the program. Give thanks. Professor Ian Boxill, the founder for the IDEAZ Journal.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Michael, and greetings to my colleagues, friends, and contributors to this special volume. And let me, in particular, thank you for the hard work and the human service that you put in to get this volume out. If you've ever worked with Michael, he doesn't leave any stone unturned, and he's always in your face. I've had to deal with Michael's persistence and his work and his commitment to Rastafarian scholarship especially at the University of the West Indies here at Mona. He has played a very important role in ensuring that the voice of the Rastafari, not simply in terms of those often muted voices we hear on radio and music, etc., but as an academic and as a person who lives his life as a Rastafari. Within that tradition, I think Michael has done quite a bit in ensuring that those ideas are circulated and that we sort of deal with them. In particular, I'm very impressed by this volume, and I've started to read a few articles. And at some point, I'll be interacting with you, Michael, and some of the other colleagues who contributed. Let me acknowledge my colleague and friend for many years, over 20 years, Johannes Merck, who will speak soon. Johannes actually hosts the journal on the IDEAZ, the site, the IDEAZ Institute in Austria, and so that persons can actually have access to that medium. But you'll hear from Johannes later. I'm just here to basically congratulate Michael and congratulate all of the co-authors of this very important volume and to encourage Michael and the others to continue their very outstanding work. So once again, I congratulate you, and I'm very proud to be associated with this 15th volume, which contributes so much to a continuing discussion of the Rastafarian movement. Thank you all, and I look forward to a really insightful, enjoyable launch.
Thank you very much, Ian. And thank you for those kind words. So at this point in time, I'd like to formally introduce Dr. Johannes Mark, which Professor Boxill had mentioned, who heads up the Institute of IDEAZ, which was actually founded in 2005. And he could probably tell us some more about the Institute of IDEAZ and how that came to be, how organically this came to be shaped and realized. Dr. Johannes Mark is the director of the Viennese IDEAZ Institute. He's a professorial lecturer at the Diplomatic Academy, Vienna, academic director of the MA program in International Relations and Urban Policy at the University of Applied Sciences, Campus Vienna. He also, is a visiting professor at the University of Quintana Roo, Mexico. Hopefully I pronounced that correctly. His research interests are non-Western and in comparative social sciences, political thought, epistemology, South-South relations, and developmental issues. And so without further ado, let's welcome Dr. Johannes Mark to the forum.
Thank you very much for your kind words. It's a wonderful and great pleasure for me to be with my friend, Ian Boxill, first of all. Great and big saludo to your beautiful island. Ian and myself, we have a friendship over 20 years when he was invited by our university at that time, Quintana Roo, in the Mexican Caribbean coast, where I was located. And from there, the IDEAZ idea emerged. Actually, Ian was the inventor of the word and of the idea and of the journal. And in 2005, when I went back home to Europe, to Austria, I asked him if I could use for my institute the same name, IDEAZ, and he agreed. And that's one of the reasons why the institute hosts at our website this wonderful journal. Congratulations to the editors, to the authors, not only of this volume, obviously we celebrate today this volume, but this is a long-standing project carried out by Ian and by many collaborators around the Caribbean, but also beyond the Caribbean. And I'm so happy to rejoin myself with you all and your wonderful university, the University of West Indies, where I have friends, not only in Jamaica, there are friends in Barbados, there are friends in Trinidad Tobago, and I am very happy to be today with all of you. The IDEAZ Institute actually is a continuation of some ideas of the IDEAZ journal. It is about thinking from a global Southern perspective. We host not only this English-speaking journal, we host a second journal called SASCAP, a Spanish-speaking journal, where Ian Boxall actually made the first contribution with an article we translated into Spanish, the Caribbean Social Sciences. Like the IDEAZ journal, we want to promote here in Europe non-centric, Eurocentric positions. We have held several dialogues, what we call dialogues with the South. Some of them we have held also at the University of West Indies a couple of years ago with Ian, and on issues of global hegemony and shift of global hegemony in this regard. So I am very happy here to be here. I just want to add something else. We are very happy also to see that the journal has launched this very important topic, that the Rastafari movement is on the table. I think these type of movements coming out from the non-Western mainstream sphere should have a broader audience. So I'm very happy that obviously, since we have an audience not here in Europe, and so we have a possibility to reach out to other communities beyond the Caribbean. I think it's very important to make a showcase, to have a showcase of thoughts that are not necessarily always in the news and that are always treated by mainstream academia. So once again, thank you very much for your presence, also for your efforts in this volume. Congratulations to the editors, and un saludo grande to you, Ian. Ian, it's so nice to see you. All the best.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Mark. Thank you indeed. So there we've heard from two persons who are very integral in the development of the IDEAZ journal, which is actually celebrating 20 years this year because it was founded in 2001. But anyway, moving on with the program, I want to now introduce one of my co-editors for this particular edition of the journal, the 2020 Vision Perspective on the Rastafari Movement. I want to introduce Dr. Julia Banacci. She is a historian. She is a researcher at the Institute de Recherche pour le Développement, or the IRD. She studies intellectual history, popular culture, and very importantly, Rastafari. She's probably best known for her landmark book titled Exodus, Heirs and Pioneers, Rastafari Return to Ethiopia. And this book was published, the English version was published in 2015 by the University of West Indies Press. Exodus, before that, it was formerly in French, and it's a great book, it's a great read. But Julia is going to give a perspective, an editorial perspective on the journal that we're launching today. And when she's finished, then I will also give a brief perspective overview from an editor's perspective. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce, I'd like to have Dr. Julia Banacci take the floor. Julia.
Thank you, Michael. Greetings to each and all of you. I would like to start by thanking my co-editors, Erin and Michael. We have known each other for about a decade and a half, and it was really nice to share with both of you the burden and the joy of bringing this collection of papers to publication. I would like to thank the University of the West Indies, and in particular the Faculty of Social Sciences, the Department of Sociology, and the Anniversary Committee for their strong support to this editorial project, as well as Pansy Ben and the Arawak team. In fact, it is always an honor to collaborate with the biggest university of the Caribbean. And I hope we will find further ways to institutionalize our relations. I want to thank as well Darren Middleton, a religious studies scholar who was instrumental in mobilizing some of the scholars whose work is featured in this volume. I want as well to thank each of the authors of the papers featured in this issue for their contribution and for their trust. As we work under the eyes of Sankofa, the Akan concept that suggests how returning to the past enables to move forward, we thought when we embarked on the editorial work for this volume that it was really important to pause for a minute and to take stock of where we are in the field of Rastafari studies. From a few marginal references in the early 1950s, we can now count hundreds of academic references related to the Rastafari movement in many languages, even though English dominates, in many places, some of them very far from Jamaica, and by many different people, including a growing body of scholars who identify as Rastafari. Undoubtedly, the field has become increasingly complex, and it is very dynamic, as every year MAs and PhDs related to Rastafari are being successfully defended in universities all over the world. The growth and the maturity of the field is reflected in the themes discussed in the volume. Thanks to the paper of Dean McNeil, it testifies to the enduring power of Bob Marley and roots reggae, the King's music. It centers as well a few themes, and I would count maybe 5 of them, that could act as a roadmap for future research initiatives. 1, the social and ritual institutions of Rastafari that are studied here by Professor Ennis Edmonds, Prof. Richard Salter, and by Dr. Michael Barnett are difficult to grasp exhaustively, but their changing pattern deserve attention. 2nd, gender represents a growing and refreshing set of questions and experiences of Rastafari, addressed here by Dr. Shamara Willie Al-Hassan and by Dr. Dina Mary Beresford, who generously document the matriarchal shift within the movement and within the study of the movement. 3rd, ganja is a promising field of study presented here through new data by Dr. Jalani Naya, and it has serious and bankable interdisciplinary potential. 4th, race is located deep into the fabric of the Rastafari movement, and its impact on identity formation is documented here by Dr. Charles Price. As Rastafari now stretches over many continents and cultures, all questions related to race will remain central to scientific inquiry. Last but not least, 3 papers in the volume tackle repatriation to Africa and Rastafari in African societies. Dr. Erin MacLeod and I document precisely the history and the challenges of Rastafari in Africa, while famed journalist Derek Bishton offers a moving portrait of Ivan Core and of his experience in Ethiopia. Each of us co-editors had a personal relationship with Ivan Core, and we really wanted to honor him with this volume. So with these forward-looking themes and directions in mind, with keen attention given to students and to their professional integration, and with a sense of shared social responsibility, yes, the field of Rastafari studies promises a bright future. I hope you will enjoy reading these papers, and I hope you will appreciate the photographs that were kindly shared by their authors, Professor Clinton Hutton and Derek Bishton, as well as the magnificent artwork on the cover of the journal. This painting, because it's originally a painting, very big in size, was made by a Rastafari sister in Mauritius, Seconde Chance, also known as Dominique Marc. And it is now in the collection of Sisters Stephanie and Ras Paco of Aquaba Création, who are as well located in Mauritius. And while the revolutionary consciousness of Rastafari and its ecological stand appeal to the youth of Mauritius, the movement is repressed and violently marginalized by the state. So their majesties in the Garden of Eden, that's eventually today's gift of Mauritius to Jamaica. I will now leave the floor for a short video of the artist Seconde Chance. Because of the time difference, she couldn't be present right now. But I'm happy to share a few words with her. Joshua, if you can send the video, please.
Greetings to all. Thank you very much for having published my work on your book. I'm Dominique Marc, a motion artist, a painter. And this painting was a commission from Stéphanie Févier. She asked me to paint His Majesty and Empress Menen in the paradise, surrounded by flowers of Ethiopia. So I have to do some research, and I learned a lot on His Majesty and Menen, on their strength, on their wisdom, on their holiness. So it gave me more strength to work on this painting, and I was honored to paint His Majesty. When Julia came to Mauritius, she saw the painting at Stephanie's place, and she asked me if she had the permission to publish it on her cover, and I was really honored. So thank you a lot, and lots of blessing for everyone who work on the book, and I wish you a lot of success, blessing, and thank you very much. Bye.
So that was artist Seconde Chance from Mauritius, and I want to thank her again for giving us the permission to publish her painting, and she's happy, so I give thanks for that. Please, Michael, you're welcome to take over.
All right. Thank you, Julia. So there you had an overview of the journal by Dr. Bonacci. I'm just going to say a few things about the journal, the edition. I'm going to focus largely on the inspiration for the title of the journal, the 2020 Vision Perspective on the Rastafari Movement, and also say something about, there's a commentary that I wrote, an inspired commentary at the back of the journal. But so far as the title is concerned, it just seemed appropriate to us to name it that. I mean, for one thing, a lot of the work on the journal was actually done during the year 2020. And so that was one, important factor. And in effect, also, I think we can see the combination of articles as a snapshot view of the Rastafari movement at this very important juncture in its trajectory. So by not only interrogating and accounting for the past of the Rastafari movement, but also by extension providing a clear spotlight on the present dynamic of the movement as it stands today, it seems appropriate to call it a 2020 vision perspective on the Rastafari movement. And also, there's the old adage that a 2020 vision is, sorry, hindsight is 2020 vision. And so saying that it is imperative to look back as we seek to chart the way forwards. Sankofaring then, using the Akan concept of seeking to chart our future by looking back at the past. And so all of that was part of the inspiration for the title of the journal. Having said of that, it's very important as well that these articles, these perspectives on the Rastafari movement, not only put Rastafari studies in good stead, but I would argue also the movement itself, so that the movement right now has reached a critical juncture. It's at a point, it's at a crossroads, if you like. It's at a crossroads. And I actually made that argument a few years back in one of my publications, Rastafari in a New Millennium. But it is at a crossroads. So for those who are in the movement, it is also imperative, I think, that they consider where the movement is at and how we can move the movement forward. So even for Rastafari themselves, I'm arguing that this is an important publication. All right, and I stand to be, I stand to be corrected on that if people don't think so. But I urge everyone to read that, whether you're Rastafari or not. Now, so far as the commentary is concerned, I was inspired to write a commentary piece. It's not really a research piece, but a commentary piece, because during the year 2020, as the year unfolded, it was seen particularly bizarre and mystical in a way. So I said, there needs to be a commentary entitled, entitled "The Year 2020 Through a Rastafari Lens." And basically, there's several things I touched on. One was, should be no surprise, was the coronavirus, the novel coronavirus, which is now popularly called COVID-19. And there are various perspectives on this, various perspectives within the movement. I just want to say that. But whatever one subscribes to as to the origin of this virus, this coronavirus, whether it was created in a medical lab that is man-made, or whether it was sprang up organically through some freak biological accident wherein it jumped across various species, the species barriers from animal to man, and has been, come about as that occurrence. The wet market scenario, in Wuhan has been one of the theories that have been posited. Whatever the origin of this virus, it has impacted our world in such, it's such an astounding way. I mean, the impact, I think, has been terrible, to be honest with you, put it frankly. But it's not only impacted us socially, economically, and in so many ways. But The outcomes, I was arguing, on a micro level are that people's basic freedoms arguably now compromised, and importantly, though, the gap between the have-nots and the haves has been widened. That's on a micro level. On a macro scale, very importantly, the economic gap between the global south and the global north has now widened. And countries that were in a dependent state before the onset of the coronavirus are now even more dependent. And these nations, without adaptable economies and a strong technological infrastructure, are going to find it increasingly more difficult to survive as we move forward into the future. And that is, to me, daunting. You know, what is going to be the fate of the global south as we traverse this new milieu, this new situation with this pandemic. Now, beyond that, I also talked about the Black Lives Matter movement, which was, of course, reignited in 2020 by the terrible, terrible killing of George Floyd, who ended up becoming a martyr to that movement. A movement, incidentally, which was formally started in 2013 by 3 young Black women, but was reignited very obviously May 25th with the killing of George Floyd. And interestingly enough, we've just had the trial case with George Chevin being, actually found guilty on counts of manslaughter and murder. Interesting. So that's an interesting development. But I want to put it to you that the Rastafari movement has long championed the mantra that Black lives matter. It has long championed the mantra that Black lives should be valued and respected worldwide. And as a result, long before this particular movement was formally founded in July 2013, it was the Rastafari movement, I would argue, that has incepted, ever since its inception in the early 30s, that has championed the plight and the rights of African people who were still under the yoke of colonialism when it started. And it was the Rastafari movement that really was pushing the case for Black liberation and African redemption from its inception. Now, Black African people didn't just need civil rights at that time, but they also needed human rights. So in that respect, we could argue that the Rastafari movement was in itself a Black Lives Matter movement, certainly at the start, at its early inception. As the campaign for the liberation of African people wherever they were in the world grew stronger and stronger, the movement became attractive to other people who were oppressed, such as the Aboriginal persons of Australia. Very interestingly, the Maori people of New Zealand, which Professor Boxill has written extensively on. So we've seen that the movement has become more popular and it's become more appealing to persons outside of the African race. Those people who relate to this struggle against oppression, this struggle for equality in various societies, So the Black Lives Matter movement was a movement that deserved some mention in the commentary. The other thing was the case of the Kensington Primary School in Jamaica. Some of you may or may not have heard of it. There was a Supreme Court ruling towards the end of July 2020 upholding the school policy of Kensington Primary School to ban locks, or dreadlocks as they said, to ban students from entering the college with locks, actually with braids and with beads. So here we saw of a very, very visible case of discrimination against Black hair. The policy of the school was disappointing to many in the community, certainly amongst Rastafari. And the Rastafari actually movement, there was a protest here in Jamaica against that ruling right outside the Ministry of Education, which did get notable press exposure by the local press here. So what we saw though was that the discrimination against Black hair, against dreadlocks, against locks, against African hair is still an issue of contention here in Jamaica. And no doubt beyond. We actually seen in Ghana, there's the case of students with locks being barred from entering the school. So this is an issue that is still under the microscope and still needs to be discussed. So lots to say, but I'm going to leave it there in the interest of time, and we're going to move on with the program. And at this point in the program, we're going to go to a roundtable discussion. And I'm going to leave it, well, Dr. Erin McLeod is going to head up that roundtable discussion. And we'll leave it to her to introduce all of the participants who we have. We have Dr. Clinton Hutton, we have Dean McNeil, we have Professor Charles Price, and we have Dr. Jelani Naya, who is one of my colleagues right here on the UWI Mona campus. So it's going to be a very interesting roundtable discussion. And let me say a few words about my colleague and co-editor, Dr. Erin McLeod, who is going to head up that roundtable discussion. She currently teaches in the English department at Vanier College, Montreal, Canada. She is an established Rastafari scholar in her own right. She notably has authored the book, Visions of Zion, Ethiopians and Rastafari in the Search for the Promised Land, and that was published in 2014. A very powerful publication on Rastafari in Ethiopia. She also, interestingly enough, contributed an article to my edited volume, Rastafari in the New Millennium, back in 2012, actually. Also, interestingly enough, many bows to her string, many strings to her bow, I should say. She is also an award-winning journalist, having written for the Guardian newspaper, the Rolling Stone, and the New York Times, just to name some. So she's a very established journalist as well. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Dr. McLeod to head up the roundtable segment of the program. Erin?
Hello. All right, so I hope that you can hear me. All right, okay, so here I am. Thank you very much to everyone who has spoken before. Thank you for the wonderful and gracious introductions from the Faculty of Social Science, as well as other representatives from the University of the West Indies, and from my co-editors, Julia Bonacci and Michael Barnett, as well as the message from Dominique Marc, Seconde Chance. On this roundtable today, we have Clinton Hutton. Clinton Hutton is a retired professor of Caribbean political philosophy, culture, and aesthetics at the University of the West Indies, Mona. He's presently director of the Institute of Technological and Educational Research at Miko University College in Kingston, Jamaica. His most recent book publications are first editor for Rupert Lewis in the Black Intellectual Tradition, author of Color for Color, Skin for Skin, Marching with the Ancestral Spirits into War, at Morant Bay, and first editor of Leonard Percival Howell and the Genesis of Rastafari. We also have Dean McNeil, who's the author of the groundbreaking work, The Bible and Bob Marley, Half the Story Has Never Been Told. He holds an MA in theology from Loyola Marymount University and a BA in English literature from the University of Michigan Honors Program. His interests lie in the intersection of music and theology. McNeil is a music industry veteran as well, a lifelong musician and former technology executive for a leading music company. He currently advises some of the world's largest and fastest growing companies on product development and execution strategy. He lives in Los Angeles, where he drums in jazz and reggae bands and enjoys hiking, baking, and sailing with his son. There's also Jelani Naya, who is a lecturer in the Institute of Caribbean Studies and former coordinator of the Rastafari Studies Unit at the University of the West Indies, Mona. I should also mention that Jelani Naya is also my former research supervisor and co-editor. He's an embedded Rastafari scholar with research interests in African religious retentions, Rastafari, repatriation for Africans, and repatriation to Ethiopia, among other areas. He also has completed his first publication as solo author, which is forthcoming, entitled Lamb's Bread, Rastafari, and Ganja in Jamaica, which, having had the privilege of reading some of this, is really a remarkable publication that we should all look forward to. Charles Price is also on our roundtable, who's an associate professor in the Department of Policy, Organization, and Leadership Studies in the College of Education at Temple University. His research, writing, and activity focus on identity formation, life narrative genres, action research, community organization and community organizing, people-centered community development, and social movements with a geographic concentration on the United States and Jamaica. He's the author of Becoming Rasta, Origins of Rastafari Identity in Jamaica, and co-author of Community Collaborations, Promoting Community Organizing. He's published many journal articles and book chapters, and recently completed a joint NSF-funded pilot study of Black men and resilience in Greensboro, North Carolina, and Hartford, Connecticut. He's currently completing his book, Rasta, The Evolution of a People and Their Identity, also something exciting to look forward to. So when we were putting together this roundtable and this launch, I reached out to the folks who are on this roundtable and asked them what they thought would be sort of a good way of getting into discussing the material in the volume. And I guess my first question is what new ground does this issue plow? I mean, we've talked about it in terms of the title, but each one of you who is on this roundtable, in your work that you have done, and then in terms of Professor Hutton, in terms of the practice that we see in the art and the photography that was provided for this particular issue. Could you please comment on what you think is the newness that is in this particular issue? And anyone can go first. And I should mention that these are 4 of our contributors to this particular issue, and the other contributors, some of them are unable to be here. Some of them are here in the Zoom with us, but some of them, due to schedule, were unable to be here, but we are thankful to them as well. So that's my question. My first sort of question to get this going is, what do you think is the new ground that your work provides in this issue, or what you see as the importance of this particular volume?
Well, the importance of this volume, I think, as Michael alluded to earlier, is really the significance of this unprecedented time. And one of my reflections while working on this was really, as the contributor of the piece about Bob Marley, is how the message is still so relevant, and even more relevant than ever before. In essence, it is music for troubling times. And that was really borne out by the statistics. As the pandemic was breaking in early 2020, Bob Marley amassed over 1 billion new download or streams rather, on streaming platforms. So his music catalog was being streamed at unprecedented levels to coincide with the unprecedented pandemic that we were facing. Indeed, in early 2020, as the pandemic was really being declared as such, a global pandemic, and we were being locked down. I had just flown in from lovely Montreal, Erin. Can't wait to get back there again. And then it was like instant lockdown in March of 2020. And Bob Marley's streams were up over 23%. Now, of course, it was also his 75th birthday in February, and that was going on as well. But his music, I think, is more important now than ever before. And it goes along also with the Black Lives Matter aspect. It's protest music. If you look at the fact, too, that in 2020, it was the 40th anniversary of Bob's last concert, September 23rd, at the Stanley Theater in Pittsburgh. If you look at that set list, it actually gives me goosebumps because it is so applicable to the time that we were in and are still in. It's actually pandemic music. He opens with Natural Mystic, and he says, if you listen carefully now, you will hear this could be the first trumpet, might as well be the last. Many more will have to suffer. Many more will have to die. Don't ask me why. That was his opening song. If you look at his third song, Burnin' and Lootin', what did we face in 2020 but unprecedented protests? Millions of people, not just hundreds of thousands like during the civil rights movement, but if you look at the New York Times story from July 3rd of 2020, scholars were saying this is the biggest movement in history. And Bob's music provides the background, the backdrop, the soundtrack to the movement of the people. If you look at his 8th song of his final concert, it's War, the lyrics of which were taken from Haile Selassie's 1963 UN address. Until the color of man's skin is of no more significance than the color of his eyes. Me say war. It's just chilling to think of the message of Rastafari being so relevant to today. And if you look at Bob's last song that he ever performed live, it was the 20th song of the night. He could barely stand. He had to sit for most of the concert. It was his last concert. His final live message was get up for your right. And that is the anthemic call for human rights, specifically the fundamental right to life that makes all others possible. So that would be my thought on how to answer that question.
I think that Julia hit the nail on the head. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, good. Greetings, everyone. I think Julia hit the nail on the head, by identifying those themes, in terms of plowing new ground. So social and ritual institutions, gender, ganja, race, repatriation, and I would just add what Dean said, the Rastafari message, human rights. And, one of the things that I think we should all pay attention to is the continued growth and spread of Rastafari to new places. And that emphasis on race, on identity, and on place, I think is important to pay attention to. So those are a few of the thoughts that I have about what this really remarkable set of articles brings to everyone.
Greetings, if I may. This is Jalani Naya. I want to start out by thanking the editors and other contributors for the investment in this volume at this time. And just to pick up on what the conversation has been suggesting, the timing for this is, as Michael framed, is critical. And I think somehow, as much as this is a prolific space for writing, research tends to lag behind the actual transformation of our community. That volume by Aikel Tafari some years ago, Rastafari in Transition, could be actually suggested as an experiential epoch that we've really been going through, perhaps since the late 80s or thereabouts. But particularly at this time, when we see that the various congregations of Rastafari, Nabingi, the Bobo Shanti, the 12 tribes, the dominant mansions out of Jamaica are not as coherent as they have been in the past. The research on gender, someone teaching this content, students are still referring to the work of the late 90s in order to frame this conversation. So in a serious way, the transformations of our community in the last 2 decades in particular, I think have not been scripted enough, have not necessarily seen rigorous translation often. My own work, which looks at the Herb Camp, strives to do this in not suggesting that this is a new institution, but suggesting that particularly as we see the framework of mansions on the decline, the spaces for day-to-day contact become of great importance for community sustenance and just the whole idea of community. And in a real way, they're going to see increased importance with the legislation which decriminalizes ganja and the whole exploration of commercializing this industry. So in a real sense, and we've seen how much online our community has become, not just as a reaction to the lockdown and COVID, but even predating this, recognizing the global dimensions, the need for supportive work on projects that are often multilateral. Our community has, for the last decade and a half, I think, been making sense of these kinds of spaces. So I think in a wholesale way, this volume seeks to bridge a void, a gap that has been in existence in the literature, in just speaking. Shamara, for example, young scholar who is looking at issues related to Rastafari women, her research taking her across the Caribbean and into Africa and North America. Those voices are important because you know, the sense of patriarchy, which we understand has been long associated with Rastafari, I think has not made sense of the lioness on the rise. And it's these kinds of things that I think are negotiated by this volume that Michael, Erin, and Julia have kept alive and brought forward in a really critical way.
I'm wondering if Clinton, you might be, Professor Hutton, if you might be able to comment on this, what this volume offers to Rastafari as an area of scholarship, but also as a practice and movement. You're muted, Clinton.
Yes, it comes at a time when the world is at a crossroad, really. And I think that's the importance of it, to locate it at the moment when the world is at a crossroad. A world that is revealing the pervasiveness and the continued strength of the epistemology of white supremacy on the global landscape. That the age-old struggles are reasserting themselves on a terrain that has been set 500 years. And hence, the role of Rastafari, in a sense, needs to come to the party in a way that it has never come before. We saw, as Dean said, the resurgence of Marley. But also, we saw also the resurgence of Garvey, the resurgence of Walter Rodney. we have also seen an emerging cultural revolution taking place in Black America, in the film industry, in trends in the developing in the music industry, but also outside of the United States. A new level of consciousness, and a level of consciousness that has gone a bit wider than before. So what we have not seen in Jamaica yet is that voice, that global voice that Rastafari always represents, that global voice being charting a path in relation to this new situation. But clearly, I like this volume. I think the attention to gender, the role of women in particular, the role of women in particular is very important. And when we look at the role of women, Black women in particularly on the global scene, then it is late in coming, and the truths that are in the article in relation to the diversity of women in the Rastafari movement and their role is something that we have been grappling with a long time. Although there are always those voices, but they were not the predominant voices. So it's important the way in which the perspective in this particular article and the case study as well, center on women is very important. And because this struggle, more than any other time in the history of struggle against white supremacy, against the systems of colonialism, neocolonialism, and imperialism, that women's role, more than any other time, is absolutely at the center. It's central. And I think that, in a sense, that reflection in that article on women is very important. I have more to say, but I'll take it up at another point.
Thank you very much, Professor Hutton. And also thank you for speaking to the issue of woman. There was a question in the chat with regards to the work in the issue by Sister Dina Marie Beresford, entitled, I want to read this correctly, charting the matriarchal shift in the Rastafari movement. The question was that they would like to learn more about this shift from patriarchal to matriarchal. And I think that this, alongside Shamara Wiley Al-Hassan's The Movement is Not About the Man Alone Towards the Rastafari Women's Studies, are both excellent pieces of work from different perspectives, one a testimony, another a scholarly work that really speaks to the shifting nature of gender and the Rastafari movement from the perspectives of Rastafari women. So I would like to speak to the roundtable in terms of what the work that they've provided. Dean McNeil can discuss his work on Bob Marley, looking at it based on the reality of now, Charles Price talked about the relevance of thinking about Rastafari and Blackness with regards to now. I'm wondering if Jelani Naya might comment. His work in this issue is on Rastafari practice. The title of the work is A Rastafari Cultural Institution, Herb Camps in the City. And and this sort of practical engagement of Rastafari in Jamaica at a grassroots level. And we've talked in sort of big picture. I was wondering if, Jelani, you could comment a little bit on your work and its very kind of local nature.
Thank you, Erin. Well, in a real sense, as I know what you mean in that introduction, but I think that this is the crucial approach of Rastafari, the local, that one really has to pay attention to in order to see the bigger picture. My argument here is that herb camps have been an embedded institution on the ground in Jamaica from the earliest days. In fact, and this is not to recontextualize what Pinnacle was, but it perhaps could have been deemed the mother of all herb camps, in a sense. So I'm saying that there's a connection to the very genesis under someone like Leonard Howell. But we know that in the 50s, the spaces in the dongle that Rastafari controlled became safe spots for persons who wanted to use the sacrament, especially with police brutality being what it was. In these spaces, a brethren we know well, Ras Franchi, he describes them as a site of petty marronage, to really suggest that these hovels, as they may be seen by the wider society, become critical points for community sustenance and production. And perhaps based on their artful invisibility, meaning that you overlook them because respectable people don't think that anything substantive happens behind those fences, etc. These overlook sites are understood within communities as a kind of halfway space, and they're so prolific that, you know, in most ghettos that you will survey in Jamaica, there are going to be 4 or 5 on one road. As you walk a few chains, you're going to find these spaces of congregation. Well, in the instances where they are Rastafari administered, I suggest that we have a tradition that links back to the open yards of Trenchtown kind of spaces that Planner would have created. And essentially, these are spaces that, even if herb sacramental usage is not the primary activity, these spaces are similar to the gates that music is produced, the sound studios, you know, the Buja Banton spaces, the Caveman studio, the Luciana studio. In a sense, the core point of the gates of a stable elder, a Rastafari of reputation, or a space for converging the community to comfortably ritualize, have conversation. These spaces are overlooked, I think, because we tend to think of congregations without necessarily paying attention to the daily points of interaction and celebration. So in a sense, that's a kind of synopsis of the space that I'm looking into. But I'm saying that this is a pretty well established space historically that's very much germane to Rastafari, you know, livity, even though I think a little overlooked in the literature.
Thank you so much, Jelani, for speaking to your research practice. And I'd like to move to Charles Price. I mean, your work previous to this, I mean, is the book Becoming Rasta, which I think is essential reading for anyone who wishes to understand Rastafari as a movement, and also Rastafari as sort of a manifestation within people. And I was wondering if you could comment on your thinking, because obviously, you know, this IDEAZ issue is presenting this 2020 vision perspective, and your essay sort of presents like a 2020 perspective on your thinking with regard to Rastafari identity, growing out of this concept of becoming Rasta and then connecting with other ways of thinking about identity.
All right, so I'm not quite sure what you're asking me, Erin, but I'll say that you know, I've spent a good part of my life understanding and learning about social movements, to learn how they work, to learn how they serve as engines of change, but also how and why people commit to them, why some people remain committed for the long haul, why some people sort of fall off along the way. And so I brought all of those questions to, you know, to the Rasta movement, you know, as a member myself, wanted to seek answers to those questions. And so, as you know, on the one hand, as a faith has spread beyond Jamaica and taken root in just about every continent, as far as I can tell, except Antarctica, you know, it's one of the questions is you know, how do the cultural traditions of those people, their understandings, and their embrace of the Rasta faith, how do those work together, and what does that mean for the Rasta movement moving forward? So I think for the 21st century, those are going to be some important questions. I mean, I'm constantly amazed that, you know, I see a Rasta from another part of the world, you know, Maori, you know, Navajo, you know, all over the world. So what does this really mean for the faith itself? You know, do people remain committed to an idea of Blackness and the divinity of His Majesty and the Empress as central to, you know, being Rasta, or is it going, you know? So there are a lot of important questions there, and I don't have all the answers to them. I don't have, you know, any answers really, but I think those are important questions that should entertain all of us, and I encourage all of us really to pick them up and to pay attention to them. I think they're going to be central to how Rastafari evolves in the 21st century.
Thank you very much, Charles. I wanted to note that Sister Beresford provided a response with regards to this matriarchal shift. I'm just going to read the response. On the surface, this observation of the matriarchal shift is largely observed within the theocracy reign order of the Nyabingi. This shift is still in motion, but women within that order and the movement writ large are being ushered into leadership roles via their acknowledgement of the presence of a feminine divine via the personage of Empress Menen Asfa. So that's a comment directly from Sister Beresford, and again, her work is in this particular issue. I'd like to turn to Dean McNeil. As I mentioned, and you were talking about earlier, about the relevance, the kind of reemergence of Bob Marley's music and its popularity during the pandemic. But your work in this issue is looking at Bob Marley from 1966 to 1970. I was wondering, when thinking about this idea of a 2020 perspective, if you could kind of reflect on the importance of that 1966 to 1970 period when formulating this 2020 perspective.
Sure, yeah, and definitely, you know, in reference to Charles's work, what I'm looking at there is Bob's immersion, his immersion into Rasta, and then his immersion. And what's beautiful is that these songs that he worked on in the 1966 to 70 era, he then reworked them during the recording sessions for Rastaman Vibration, which was his worldwide breakthrough album. That was the one that really established him. He was on the cover of Rolling Stone, magazine, and he was definitely bringing the message of Rasta to the masses. As Professor Chavanes has astutely pointed out, it was akin to St. Paul's decision to preach to the Gentiles. When Bob did that, he took the message worldwide. So he reworked those early songs. And I dig deep into how he does that, and you could actually see his theological and artistic development. And it's a great way to look at this artist who we all love and adore, right? I mean, who on planet Earth does not love Bob Marley? And he's just so universal. And that's part of the takeaway of the message too, is the universality. One Love, the anthem. And so in reference to the immersion there, and then how relevant it is to today, because you have to look at that period in Jamaica, what heralded that brief transitional period of the Wailers from ska to rocksteady to reggae in 1966 was the first groundation with Emperor Haile Selassie's visit to Jamaica on April 21st, 1966. Now, Bob actually missed it because he was in the US working to save money to start his own label. And when he got back after around 9 months, he spent most of 1966 in the US. That's when the Wailers started their Wailin' Solemn label. And they put out fantastic music. But that event, the first groundation, would be key. And then Bob himself attended his first groundation ceremony in 1968. And that's when the Wailers really started chanting down Babylon. And really by 1970, that's when, Jah is Mighty and the more secular version, Cornerstone, came out. And Cornerstone is a key symbol for Bob throughout his career. It's taken from Psalm 118, verse 22. And that image of the cornerstone, it's a recurring motif, particularly on the album Survival. It's also in songs such as, what's in So Much Trouble in the World, right? Great pandemic song right there. And Ride Naughty Ride, one of my favorites. So it's a polyvalent image, and it at once represents Marley himself, the Rastafari community, Emperor Selassie, and a soon-to-be newly created Africa. Because on that album, Survival, when you look at the cover of all the African nations, it's his most Afrocentric album, and he's talking about a new creation. For Marley, the end times really are synonymous with a return to the unity of creation. As it was in the beginning, so shall it be in the end. One love, right? And Africa Unite, that song really captures that message very well as well from the album Survival. So very relevant for today. And Bob is a wisdom teacher. I cover a little bit of that. Where he really takes on that aspect, that persona of a wisdom teacher. That speaks to what Clinton was saying earlier about Rasta heralding this new level of consciousness. That is what Bob is. He's a messenger of a higher consciousness. And when we tap into it via his music, whether knowingly or not, we are leveling up in our consciousness with his wisdom that he brings. And the fact that he is a wisdom teacher, again, plays out on the internet today because of the fact that you will see many anonymous wisdom quotations circulated on social media, and they're attributed to Bob Marley without any evidence that he said them, of course, because we know that he's so wise. Of course, this would be something that Bob Marley said, right? So I just love watching this continue to evolve. and how the relevance of the message to today. And to just end it, I could go on forever, but as the Wailers said in 1971, one good thing about music, when it hits, you feel no pain. So music is that refuge, like the herb camps that Jelani was talking about. It's a musical space that you could take refuge. And I found it beautiful when I read Jelani's piece that in one of the camps, there's just 3 pictures: Emperor Selassie, a lion, and Bob Marley on the wall. And that just summarizes it all for me.
Thank you very much, Dean. And you were talking about sort of telling stories and the kind of imagery of Rastafari and the imagery of Bob Marley. And I hope I'm able to do this. I just wanted to quickly share an image. I don't know if people can see this image. Yes or no?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yes, okay. This is the image that Clinton Hutton took in. It's a picture from 2014. I'm just going to read the caption just in case it can't be seen clearly. A reenactment of the coronation of Emperor Haile Selassie I, featuring priest Dermot Fagan of the School of Vision, House of Rastafari, Jamaica, handing an imitation orb to Ras Roy Ivory, photo taken on November 2nd, 2014, on the occasion of the 84th anniversary of the coronation of Emperor Haile Selassie I at Scott's Pass Nyabinghi Center, Clarendon, Jamaica. I mean, this is quite a powerful image, sort of demonstrating the strength of history in terms of the individuals that are involved, the kind of passing on of stories, passing on of ritual. And I was wondering if you could comment on this image as well as on the kind of development of the aesthetics of Rasta, or the narratives of Rasta, the storytelling of Rasta over time, as someone who has contributed to such a rich archive.
Was that for me, Aaron?
This is for Clinton.
Oh, for Clinton. There you go.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, I've actually, over decades, I've taken thousands of photos of Rastafari in various situations. And I have an interest in studying African, Caribbean, and generally African in the diaspora culture, the culture of enslaved Africans and various spiritual practices. So I've taken pictures in Cuba, Haiti, Trinidad, across the Caribbean, Guyana, of spiritual practices. And Rastafari emerged out of older Jamaican practices, Kumina, revival. And in fact, they have had an impact on the tendency, the aesthetic, as well as messages in our music tradition, including influencing reggae music. And certainly the role of Count Ozzy in developing that what is now regarded as a Nyabinghi tradition, drumming pattern, but which also was influenced by revival and Kumina. So I've had that long history of not just photographing Rastafari, but within the general cultural ethos from which it came, and asserted itself as well on the aesthetic complex of the of Jamaica and the world. So that Marley's, if you look at the performances and the backdrops and so on, they would begin to reflect that visual aesthetic of Rastafari that emerged from, you look at some of the earliest works of visual arts and the tradition from whence they came, then they reasserted themselves on the backdrops of some of the performances by Marley and other artists from Jamaica. It's important to understand that, because part of the problems that we have faced over the years, this problem of identity, the most sustained form of schooling and education that we have got generationally for hundreds of years is that schooling and education rooted in Eurocentric epistemology. Not only that epistemology has as an important part of it the issues concerning notions of beauty, the aesthetic. And certainly, and that is why, for example, you have the hostility that some persons in the 1930s, and especially in the 1940s, in relation to the issue of hair, could assert, like as we say, make it bond them, assert that I am going to wear my hair a certain way as a form of assertion of self and as a protest against white supremacy and its dictates. So aesthetics, ideas about beauty, whether of the body, which was so desecrated under slavery and colonialism, that part of freedom is a reclamation of that body, the body that is deemed to be criminal, deemed to be ugly, and so on. All of these things that the Black body is deemed to be. So you can see in Nyabingi's and in people's demeanor, in their dress, and so on, ritualized garments and ritualized bodies into a new direction, a direction that is part of the struggle for freedom and identity and for sovereignty, the sovereignty of the Black body, a sovereign space in this world, because the world does not belong to one people alone. The world belongs to all who live in it. And part of the struggle is the struggle to become, the struggle to be. And central to that struggle has to do with issues of aesthetics, of sound, and of sight, and of movement. And certainly Marley was critical with that. And part of the struggle now is for that, with the many the films that we're now seeing coming out of the United States. You know, film about Billie Holiday being seen in a different light, and so on. So Fred Hampton. So it's very important. We also should note that in terms of, let us take Marley, Jamaicans were as familiar with the folk wisdom that are encapsulated in what we call proverbs, or what the older folk would call telling, Jamaican aphorisms that are deeply rooted in African wisdom. They were as central to Marley's music in terms of philosophy and aesthetic as ideas coming out of the Bible. But beyond that, when Marley speaks in Redemption Song or in Slave Driver, what he's actually saying, which is coming from an older tradition beyond Rastafari, before Rastafari, which Rastafari embraced, is that Marley was saying in those songs, I am my ancestors and my ancestors are me. Right? So philosophically, we can look through Marley's music to see the different threads that shape that philosophy. And that philosophy, ultimately, what Marley said, that his duty on the earth was to help to realize the Marcus Garvey revolution. Right? So there's a long philosophical tradition, long before Rastafari, but which Rastafari embraced. And for that, I mean, listen to Black Heart Man album by Bonnie Whaler, right? The tribulation that Rastafari had to pass through, but also the great hope. And not just hope, but the certainty that we shall overcome. They are all embedded in that cultural ethos. And that is what I'm trying to do with the photos that have been taken, but not only that, also with the paintings that I've been doing. Thank you.
There's a question that has come in specific to your photography and your paintings, which is, do you have a plan to make or give access to your collection for researchers?
Certainly. I have, in fact, I've done so in the past. Michael Barnett can tell you that. Babylon, that painting. In fact, the one with you and Jelani, that one as well. So yes, there's a long history of that as well. Yeah.
Thank you.
And I use it in teaching. I use them in teaching as well, paintings and photographs.
May I, Erin?
Yes, go ahead, Jelani.
I just want to use the opportunity to identify Clinton Hutton's pioneering work in helping to foreground the Rastafari woman. Over 20 years ago, I remember him mounting an exhibition which showed Black women, a lot of them Rastafari women, and just to hear how impacting that was for students who, you know, didn't have silky cream hair or didn't aspire for those kinds of things that Clinton brought to Mona campus, almost destabilizing aesthetic display of Black feminine beauty. And, you know, I want to link that to the conversation about the kind of representation that Dr. Beresford and Rasses Jazz and I have been part of producing. It's really the kind of work that we are not enough aware of, which is a completely non-Western lens from which to unpack the ethos of Rastafari woman. In fact, I think some of the earlier work borrowed lenses that the later scholars such as Dr. Beresford and Dr. Jazz and I, etc., they're not trying to be labeled with those biases of white feminism. And also to demonstrate now that there is a certain understanding of Ethiopian femininity, African femininity, the idea of the, Queen Mother, Black Goddess, etc., that allows for the reconstructing of motherhood, femininity, woman. That's a part of the new work that I think has entered into the space. The range of unseen kind of representations, whether it is of Empress Menen, Empress Tai Tu, the ways that these connections help to continuously inform the representation of womanhood. And at the heart of it, Rastafari has, and the new literature tells us this, in many instances, women have been less available to researchers. In some instances, they don't want you to poke into our lives. In some instances, they're too busy to be engaged for the purpose of research. And this has led to a range of skewed representations of the Rastafari woman and her trad. And I see now that there is increased investment on the part of women, not just to be able to articulate their representation, but to show that there is a crystal example that we can find, that we can emulate. And many of these things previously were not so present. So whereas we have the Marcus Garveys and a range of, gigantic women, and I know we have our Amy Ashwoods and, Una Marsons, etc. There is, in my mind, a deliberate assemblage within Rastafari women now, an order of womanhood that can be a part of the conversation that the males perhaps previously were not too focused on. So that's one of the new aspects, I think, is very much central, and I'm recognizing Clinton's work in helping to create that confidence and example that is often all that's necessary.
Thank you, Jelani. I think that is a nice link to what I think can be our final question, coming from the chat from Dominique Stewart, who asks, what fields and disciplines do you think should be more engaged in the study of Rastafari? And I'm wondering if everyone on the roundtable could comment on this. Perhaps we can start with you, Charles.
Good. So my quick response would be that it's not so much about the field, but about the researchers, about the scholars and what they bring to the research. So, to me, the field is almost irrelevant, but it's really about what the individual scholar brings to the work.
Would you want to comment, Dean?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's really about the message and, getting to the root of the matter. As has been pointed out, I mean, even when asked, who are your greatest influences, Bob Marley responded, Haile Selassie and Marcus Garvey. I mean, let's get to the source material here. So it's about understanding the message and then how it applies to the different disciplines, whether music, visual arts, poetry, life itself. You know, there are life lessons to be learned from this body of knowledge that Rastafari represents. And so it's kind of universally applicable, really, you know, so to the point of it, you know, being a field of study in and of itself, you know, that's great. But what's also great is to see how it applies across the board.
And Clinton, would you be able to comment on this? You're muted, unfortunately.
Yes, everything that is possible to allow me to understand, I'll use so that I've always used multiple forms in order to excavate and to understand. But importantly, the wisdom of ordinary folks. To understand their rituals, the way they create meanings, in the traditions from whence I came. They are very, very important to me because as far as I'm concerned, I need to reflect the meanings, and there are some very profound meanings for the world coming from sources that are not regarded as important. You know, and as the head cornerstone, the stone that the builder refused type of thing, I believe in that.
Amen.
And Jelani, would you be able to comment on that idea of what fields or disciplines do you think should be more engaged in the study of Rastafari?
I think I'd have to agree with Charles's comment about what persons bring. I mean, for example, I find the work he brings applicable into our future as we look at Rastafari jumping ethnic, divides and getting other racial groups in. The kind of pulse as to how to reread their measure of connectedness. What is the indices of blackness or negrescence or whatever it is that he has helped us to understand can be a way of engaging and probing. I think that's critical. But I also want to say that in the context of the earlier conversation about Black Lives Matter and Rastafari's demonstrated claim to being very much representative of that, I'm curious about the way we position our community in relating to now. So for example, to come back to what I think I'm trying to say, the Black Lives Matter hashtag has been a moment of internationalization in a critical way of the Black pandemic, issue globally. But that critical globalization is lost if the African American is not more central within the Pan-African conversation. The African American is the prime motivator of Africans all over the globe. So we can't just be brought out on the instance of a George Floyd, but there has to be a clear kind of Pan-African solidarity and leadership coming from that space. I think the attention to Rastafari can help in bridging that kind of divide. So I'm not sure if I've answered your question, Erin, but that's what comes to mind as
Definitely. I think that is an answer to the question for sure. And I was just asked by one of the panelists, Charles, about sort of a comment on Rastafari in Ethiopia, in Africa. And I think that I might just make a comment that kind of relates to what Jelani was talking about the resonance of Rastafari with regards to something, for instance, like Black Lives Matter. When doing my research, I spoke with Beta Mariam Makonnen, Haile Selassie's grandson, and he had been raised by His Majesty and then was imprisoned for many years until the fall of the communist government, at which point he moved to Canada for about a decade and then returned to Ethiopia. And during that period of imprisonment and subsequently, one of the things that he felt was of great value with regards to the Rastafari movement was the attention that Rastafari lent to Ethiopia. And I think if we think right presently, I mean, Ethiopia is going through a time of significant strife for a range of different reasons. Presently in the north, there have been issues in Shashamane. There have been issues in many parts of Ethiopia. And I think that all of us here who are part of this discussion would want nothing else but peace in Ethiopia. And I think one of the things that Rastafari has done and continues to do, regardless of what fields and disciplines engage with Rastafari, is that Rastafari demands attention on the continent of Africa as well as specifically Ethiopia. And presently, that is something that is desperately needed. And so I think that continued engagement with Rastafari is essential to Ethiopia and to the world at large. And so I think Julia has a final comment, and then perhaps we can move to speak with Michael into the end of our lunch.
Thank you, Erin. Once is not common for me, but I would like to preach for my chapel and encourage students of history to engage with the Rastafari movement, because you see, we often use a narrative that we share that on the history of the movement that is produced both by Rastafari people and by scholars, but there's always more to that. And evidence of that need for historical research. And when I talk about historical research, I don't talk about relying only on, say, British colonial archives. Okay, we have now in history the capacity to use a wide range of sources that includes vernacular sources as well. And it's particularly significant and important to engage the history of the movement. And I think it's because of that, or thanks to that engagement with history, that I was able to produce this social history of return to Ethiopia. And not only of the Rastafari people who settled in Addis Ababa and later on in Shashamane, but as well of placing Rastafari in the longer history of African American or African Caribbean people who engaged with Ethiopia. And that history, at the state of my knowledge, really starts at the late 19th century with Benito Sylvain from Haiti arriving in Ethiopia 1 year only after the victory at Adwa by Emperor Menelik against the Italians. So there's, you know, I will, I think, always defend a kind of wider historical background in an approach to the Rastafari movement. And that's as well due to my location. I am not in Jamaica, you know, so there's a lot of things that could be done in Jamaica that I can't do because I'm not there. As simple as that. So this history of the Rasta people in Ethiopia is central, both to the Rasta movement, even though it has for decades, it has been kept more as a discursive space, you know, return as a discourse. And I have really tried to bring in the physical mobility, the actual practice of repatriation with the challenges that are corollary to this mobility, and people like Erin, but as well a bunch of other people who made very good research in Ethiopia. I'm thinking about David Aarons or Alfredo Romero Contreras from Mexico, or Shailen Gomez from Trinidad, Mahalet Ayele recently at the MA level. There's a number of research being produced on Rastafari in Ethiopia. And I think as well that, in a sense, Jamaica still have to make sense really of what happened in Ethiopia for the Rasta people in the past, historically, but as well as today, as Erin reminded us, the place is full of challenges. But over time, one of the major developments that I have witnessed in Ethiopia, but as well more broadly in Africa, is really a very strong African Rastafari movement that is articulated with, you know, returnees to the continent, and, you know, there's circulations and people and shared knowledge, but there's an African Rastafari movement, and even that word is too broad, because the Rastafari movement in South Africa, for example, has pretty different features than a Rastafari movement in Congo, Kinshasa in particular, you know, or very different from, say, Mali, even though Rastafari have a public visibility there. They've been organizing, you know, cultural events, etc. So even within the continent, there's very different positionings of Rastafari people and communities. But overall, and maybe for, in that sense, countries like Tanzania or South Africa are more progressive regarding the social location of Rastafari in these societies. But apart from them, I see many places where it's really a struggle to be a Rastafari and to remain respected by society. And Jamaican people, Jamaican Rastafari know about that struggle, right? Even though the landscape has changed to a certain extent, you know, over the decades. In Africa, Rastafari, Brethren and Sistren, depending on their country still, you know, it's not really everywhere the same. But they can face social marginalization, sometime in a very repressive manner. We talked about Mauritius earlier on, for different reasons that are related both to local context and local policies, or the sense of Africanity that and that's, let's say, a common concern for these Southwest Indian Ocean islands. They have a very complex relationship with Africa and their own Africanity, which is, again, different, say, in Zimbabwe, because of the very history of Rhodesia and Zimbabwe and Bob Marley in Zimbabwe, etc., etc. So I would really encourage upcoming students to look to Africa, because in terms of research and producing knowledge and repairing, you know, strained solidarities, there's definitely wonderful projects to develop in the continent. And I cherish the hope one day to be able to work with Jamaican, Caribbean scholars and African-based scholars because we need to bridge and I hope one day we'll be able to pull together, and I'm talking to my colleagues who are sitting in the room and listening to us, together we can pull, and create consortium and find money and create research and venues for knowledge production and in the respect, of each and everyone. And I would definitely love to be part of any, research related to Rastafari in Africa, as I think that is a very fruitful direction to follow. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Julia. And I think that's a great way of kind of moving to the end of our program here. There's obviously a lot of rich areas of future scholarship on Rastafari. And so I will move to Michael Barnett to close our event today and to provide the essential thank yous that we need to provide to everyone who has been a part of this and assisted.
Okay, thank you, Erin, and thank you to the roundtable panel. And Julia was very passionate about studying Rastafari in Africa. So the discourse is very rich, and it goes without saying that, we can have many more of these sessions, but unfortunately, so far as this session is concerned, we're really coming close to the end of time. So I'm going to look to try and wrap things up by giving a brief vote of thanks. Before I do that, though, it behooves me to let everybody know that the volume is available from one of the co-publishers, actually, for this particular journal, which is Width and Stock Publishers. So that's WIPF, Width and Stock Publishers. They have a website which you can go to order copies if you're in North America anyway. HTTPS /width and stock, just spell it out.com. Also, it's available on Amazon. So that's also important. And also for those in Jamaica, it's currently available at UE Bookstore in Kingston, right here on the Mona campus. So it's available there, hard copy, at the UE Bookstore at the moment. So lots of ways of getting hold of the journal. If people, have any more questions and so forth, they can send emails and so forth. But very quickly, I'd like to take the opportunity to thank the Graduate Studies Research and Publications Awards Committee, as well as the Office of the Principal for furnishing funding, some of the funding that was put towards the cost of publishing hard copies of the journal. So there was, obviously costs incurred, and in this case, I was able to get some assistance from them for that. Also, I'd like to thank, of course, all of the contributors and the authors, including my co-editors, for their work for making the volume happen, for making it a reality. So that's very important. And also, very importantly, those who helped to produce this event. I must give a big up to Joshua Bell, Keisha Sherman Hole, who kind of worked with the technology. And on that cue, Joshua, I'm wondering if you could just put up just the front cover of the journal one more time while I finish up the vote of thanks. And also, I must thank my department, Sociology, Psychology, and Social Work, for providing support, and the Faculty Office for Social Sciences, and of course, the FSS at 60 Celebration Committee for their support in making this event happen. And I know there are people that I've left out who have been supportive in this endeavor, not only in making the journal a reality, but in terms of helping with the promotion of this event and supporting general support of the event. But if I have neglected to mention your name, please forgive me. But we're going to leave it there. And also, very importantly, this is still happening during the period of the celebration of His Majesty's visit to the Caribbean. So I'm going to be a little Caribbean centric here. His Majesty visited Trinidad, started off his Caribbean tour on the 18th of April and went right through to his trip in Haiti. He left Jamaica in the 24th, but he came to Jamaica in the 21st. So this would be 55 years of his third day of his visit to Jamaica. Anyway, just by the way, but still, symbolic and something that is meaningful in terms of the discussion of Rastafari. As fate would have it, we're having it during the celebrations of the visit of His Majesty to the Caribbean. But thank you everybody for attending. And, who knows, lots more discussions to be had on the current state of the Rastafari movement. And maybe we'll see you at another forum, another place. But thank you everybody for attending our launch. And I'm hoping you'll be able to get a hold of a copy of the book, of the journal. As I said, by default, it is available at Amazon in Jamaica. It's available at a UWI bookstore if you want a hard copy here, without going through Amazon. And then the co-publishers, Width and Stock Publishers, also it's available if you go to their website. All right. Thank you very much and have a very good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for your attendance and thank you for partaking. We give thanks in the name of His Imperial Majesty Haile Selassie I and Her Empress, Her Majesty Queen, Empress Menen Asfa.